The email arrived at 4:47 p.m. Subject line, quick touch point before EOD. That phrase had never meant anything good. I stared at the blinking cursor for a moment, knowing exactly what it was. Not a touch point, not a check-in. A firing, neatly packaged in HR euphemisms and pastel-colored templates. The meeting invite came from Melissa Harlan, Executive Director of Culture and Strategy, which was ironic considering she'd married into both words. When I joined Halvik's Capital, it was just numbers and rules, a place where logic still mattered more than LinkedIn quotes. But after the CEO's son married Melissa, everything began to sparkle and rot at the same time. New slogans appeared overnight: rebrand, realign, reignite. And one by one, the people who asked too many questions quietly disappeared. By 5, I was walking into a glass conference room that smelled faintly of lemon sanitizer and fear. Melissa sat at the head of the table in a cream blazer, scrolling through her phone like this was a brunch reservation gone wrong. Next to her sat Gareth from HR, already rehearsing his soft voice sympathy. "Elena, thanks for joining so quickly," Melissa began, setting her phone down. "You've been an asset, truly, but as part of our optics refresh." I stopped listening after that word, optics. They always used it when they didn't want to say truth. Gareth slid a folder across the table, the standard exit packet, neutral font, no human fingerprints. "We're restructuring the financial analytics team," he said, "simplifying workflows, bringing in new energy." New energy. That was rich. I'd given this place 10 years, built the automated control models that caught fraudulent vendor routing, reconciled 12 acquisitions, and wrote the compliance protocols that kept them from drowning in fines. My energy wasn't the problem. It was my accuracy. "Of course," I said. My voice was even, which seemed to unsettle Melissa.
"Does Robert know?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "This was a leadership decision, Elena. Don't take it personally." Robert, her husband, the company's CFO, had approved every one of my anomaly reports until 2 months ago, when the transfers started multiplying like fruit flies. Tiny, consistent, suspicious. I'd flagged them in my system, codename Sentinel 3.1, and brought them to him quietly. His reaction had been cold, clinical, and final. Don't dig where there's no gold. Now here I was. As I signed the termination form, I noticed the timestamp on the HR letterhead. Generated at 2:09 p.m. My firing had been printed before the touchpoint invite was even sent. Efficient. Preordained. When they handed me the company laptop to return, I almost smiled. Sentinel 3.1 didn't live there. It lived in a cloud environment, quietly syncing to a secure database I'd built off-site, pulling fresh data each night at 11:58 p.m., 5 minutes before the system backups purged daily records. Melissa rose and extended her hand. I shook it. Her palm was cold, damp, trembling faintly, not from guilt, but from adrenaline. She was proud of this. She thought she'd won. "Thank you for your service," she said, voice sugary with condescension. "This isn't personal, Elena. It's just business optics." "Of course," I said softly. "I've always been a big believer in transparency." Her brow furrowed, confused by the tone, but I was already collecting my coat. As I stepped out into the hallway, my ID badge deactivated mid-swipe. The security light blinked red. Behind the frosted glass, I saw Melissa laughing with Gareth, already moving on to their next alignment. By the time I reached the parking lot, the winter dusk had settled low and gray. My phone buzzed, system alert from Sentinel 3.1. New anomalies detected. Vendor 40899. Total variance, $1,173,000. Non-conforming routing. Below it, a note from my own automation logs. Scheduled dispatch. External audit at marstonpartners.com, 11:59 p.m. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, exhaled slowly, and watched the steam curl upward like smoke from a match that had just been struck. They'd fired me to look ethical, but the numbers had already started talking, and numbers, unlike people, don't care about optics. The apartment was very quiet that weekend, the kind of quiet that lets numbers speak. I cleared the dining table the way surgeons clear trays, set out my worn legal pad, a pencil, and the spiral-bound notebook labeled Sentinel, field notes. The radiator ticked like a metronome. Outside, the streetlight fractured across a wet sidewalk. I opened my personal laptop and authenticated into the read-only mirror I'd built months ago. A narrow tunnel into Halvix's data exhaust, nothing more. No write access, no edits. Just the truth, cached every night at 11:58 p.m. Sentinel 3.1 wasn't magic. It was a net woven from dull rules other people were too busy to love. The scripts pulled. AP subledger extracts for the last rolling 90 days. Vendor master file snapshots, legal names, EINs, banking coordinates. Wire ACH detail, beneficiary, routing, origin, GL, purpose code. Expense reimbursements with receipt OCR. Then it scored transactions against a set of tests I'd tuned by hand. Duplicate beneficiary routing across unrelated vendors. Round dollar wires $50,000 initiated after 4:45 p.m. on Fridays. Split payments just under single approver thresholds within a 3-day window. Phonetic similarity between vendor legal names and known officer trusts. Soundex and Jaro Winkler do not care about optics. Benford variance on invoice leading digits when a vendor matures too fast. I'd shown it to Robert 6 months ago. He'd skimmed the dashboard, squinted at the false positive rate, and set his coffee on the corner of my printouts like a placeholder. Don't get lost in decimals, Elena. He didn't ask why the decimals were trying to tell him a story. Now the story was louder. The flagged items clustered like bruises. A consulting entity that appeared from nowhere, Larchmont Advisory Partners, LLC, billing in perfect $200,000 increments. Delivered on the last business day of 3 consecutive months. Same routing, different memo lines. The vendor master listed a New Jersey address that, when I ran it through the postal database, resolved to a mailbox service tucked behind a pharmacy. The EIN pointed to a dissolved company in Delaware. The bank? A regional institution that loved confidentiality clauses in its treasury products. Another pattern sat like a quiet engine. 5 wires to Stratfield Property Holding. Round dollars. Memo, escrow. Escrow for what? We own no property there, I wrote, then erased the we. Old habits. I pulled receipts Melissa had approved as culture initiatives, brunches labeled vendor relations, a floral subscription marked recruitment experience, and one elegant invoice. Reimbursement, stakeholder hospitality, Amsterdam. The upload was a photo of a handwritten bar tab, no itemization, no attendees listed. It sailed through at $9,800. Our limit before CFO review was $10,000. Sentinel had a rule for that. I scanned my notes, then the part of the vendor file most people ignore, beneficiary name normalization. Larchmont's bank beneficiary had 2 extra spaces between names. A quirk, unless you've seen how people try to bypass string matching controls. Sentinel didn't care about spaces. It hashed the clean string and compared it to other beneficiaries. 2 hits. The second beneficiary was Stratfield Property Holding. Same routing, different names, one owner. I wrote, slow, deliberate. Same money river, different boats. When the kettle clicked off, I poured tea and stood at the window. Across the street, a laundromat spun other people's lives into order. I remembered the first time Robert brushed my handwritten escalation aside, how he'd said, "You're overfitting," like he was patting a child's head. I remembered the second time, when Melissa joined the meeting with a cheerful, "Let's not make perfect the enemy of progress." Their progress had a routing number. At 10:30 p.m., I set Sentinel to run its nightly sync and checked the service account. Still active, still whitelisted to the mirror IP. No one had thought to disable the account that did nothing but watch. I turned to the chain of custody. Each downloaded extract was saved to a worm bucket with an immediate SHA-256 hash, the digest printed in my notebook. Evidence, not ammunition. It mattered that I could say, under oath if it came to that I never altered a thing. Documentation is not revenge, it is geometry. Near midnight, I opened the Anomalies Pending Dispatch view. New items glowed in patient yellow. Vendor, Larchmont Advisory Partners, 3 wires, $600,000 in aggregate in 72 hours. Beneficiary match with alternate name entity Stratfield Property Holding. Escrow memo inconsistent with GL classification. Expense, stakeholder hospitality, Amsterdam, $9,800. No attendee list. Policy breach. Sentinel's schedule ticked at the bottom of the screen, a calm heartbeat. Next, compile digest, 11:58 p.m. Next, transmit digest, external.audio@marstonpartners.com, 11:59 p.m. CC controller@halvixcap.com, per Q4 compliance plan. I didn't touch the settings. I didn't add or remove recipients. I didn't forward anything to myself. I watched the clock drift toward the minute where all I had built would breathe on its own. The radiator hissed once and went quiet, like the room understood. At 11:58, Sentinel pulled the ledgers into its mouth. At 11:59, it exhaled the digest to the address nobody ever noticed until it was too late. Down the hall, the neighbor's door shut with a soft click. My phone vibrated. A single note, dispatch complete. And then another, sharper tone, new anomaly detected, beneficiary alias linked to R. Harlan Family Trust. The kettle began to cool. The apartment returned to its gentle hum. I closed the laptop without smiling. Morning would turn the yellow lights on in that glass building again. Someone would make coffee. Someone would recite values from a slide. And somewhere between their first and second meetings, an auditor would open an email. Numbers do not knock before entering. They just arrive. By Monday morning, I was no longer a person, just a footnote. Halvix's internal memo went out at 9:03 a.m. sharp. I didn't receive it, of course, but someone forwarded it from a personal address with the subject line, "Thought you'd want to see this." The email was concise, sterile, like a medical report. As part of our ongoing commitment to transparency and organizational renewal, we're excited to announce a strategic refresh in our financial analytics division. Please welcome Ava Chen as our new data integrity lead. We thank Elena Ruiz for her many years of service and wish her success in her future endeavors. I stared at the words, strategic refresh, the corporate euphemism for erasure. Below the announcement was a photo of Melissa and Ava, smiling together, hands clasped, like a mentorship campaign. The caption read, "Passing the torch." The irony wasn't lost on me. The torch in question was Sentinel 3.1. The same program Melissa had called an unnecessary compliance indulgence during a budget review last quarter. the system that had been running long before Ava's welcome post hit the company's Slack. Ava was 26, bright, polite, and far too trusting. When she joined as my intern 2 years ago, she once said she wanted to make finance feel human. I'd smiled then, not unkindly. The world would teach her soon enough. I closed the laptop and opened my phone. Overnight, Sentinel had sent its digest. The status log was green. Digest delivered. External_audio at marstonpartners.com. 11:59:04 p.m. Read receipt. Confirmed. No fireworks, no alarms, just a timestamp. But in the world of compliance, timestamps are detonations with delayed fuses. Around noon, a LinkedIn notification blinked. Melissa had tagged the company in her new post. Leadership is about renewal, proud to welcome fresh energy and bold perspectives to Halvix's financial integrity team. #Women in Finance, #culture of accountability. The comment section buzzed with emojis and applause from the same people who'd avoided eye contact in the cafeteria last week. One line caught my eye. Someone had written, "Transparency looks good on you, Melissa." Transparency. The word had become a performance. That afternoon I took a walk through downtown, the air thick with pre-storm humidity. I passed the Halvix building, glass gleaming like an accusation. The security guard outside didn't recognize me. He nodded as though I were a stranger. Through the revolving doors I could see the marble lobby I'd walked across 1,000 times. Melissa stood by reception, laughing with a small group, camera crew perhaps. The company had been rebranding every surface lately. Even ethics came with a filter. On a nearby digital display, a slide rotated between slogans. Integrity scales. Accountability matters. Trust is our currency. Trust, I thought, was also their liability. My phone vibrated again, an alert from Sentinel. System access attempt detected from user chen_a at halvixcap.com. Unauthorized credentials. Access denied. Backup authentication sequence triggered. Ava had tried to log into the model, probably just doing what she'd been told, but her credentials didn't match the owner's signature. Sentinel, ever polite, had locked her out and sent a brief automated note to the internal audit mailbox. Unauthorized modification attempt on registered internal control framework detected, logged per compliance protocol. It wasn't malicious, just methodical. The system followed its rules. By evening, my name had vanished from the internal project wiki. Even the commit history was rewritten under a shared account labeled Finance System Dev. They thought that would erase ownership. It wouldn't. The creation timestamp still bore my digital signature. Ruiz e.origins.has/7AA41C. Invisible to the untrained eye, but permanent in the metadata. Melissa's post reached 6,000 likes by the end of the day. She replied to nearly every comment, her tone a perfect mix of executive humility and curated empowerment. "Proud of my team," she wrote. "We're building a culture of truth." Some truths don't need building, I thought. They just need air. At midnight, I checked Sentinel's runtime again. The next digest had compiled automatically, clean and on schedule. A new line appeared in the audit trail. External partner escalation triggered. Anomaly category: recurring vendor misclassification, Tier 2 severity. The trigger meant that Marston Partners, the audit firm, had opened the digest, reviewed the flags, and escalated it to their compliance partner for confirmation. A Tier 2 meant potential fraud exposure over $1 million. That level of escalation wasn't private. By policy, it also copied the Halvix controller, legal, and board audit chair. In other words, by the time Melissa's next photo went live, Her husband's inbox would already contain the same spreadsheet she'd dismissed as bureaucratic clutter. I leaned back in my chair and let the night breathe around me. Somewhere in that glass tower, a young woman was trying to access a system she didn't understand. And a man was about to realize that numbers could tell stories, even when the storytellers were gone. The emails were already moving through the cables, polite and factual, the way only data can be. And by morning, Halvix's house of transparency would start to see its own reflection, ledger lines forming a mirror they couldn't control. Wednesday began with stillness, the kind of corporate silence that always means someone has opened the wrong file. At 8:12 a.m., the markets opened. At 8:14, the Halvix trading desk froze. By 8:30, 3 emails from the compliance team had landed in Robert Harlan's inbox marked Urgent, External Inquiry. I didn't see them, of course, but silence has a sound, and by noon it was echoing down every glass corridor in that building. Melissa didn't post that morning. For her, that was the first warning. I spent the day at my kitchen counter, laptop open, watching the data logs the way one might watch weather radar. No leaks, no breaches, no noise. Sentinel had done its job cleanly, transmitting only the digest, not the raw data. Controlled precision. The audit firm had acknowledged receipt, flagged material inconsistencies between Halvix's reported financials and its actual vendor outflows. I sipped cold coffee and scrolled through the metadata. It wasn't just the Larchmont shell anymore. Sentinel had identified a new name. Devlin Strategic Advisors, registered to a P.O. box in London, dispersing funds to an account that, when cross-checked, looped back to the same trust identifier as Stratfield Property Holdings. Different company, same beneficiary, same CFO oversight. It didn't surprise me. Fraud rarely hides deep. It hides in plain sight, under names that sound expensive. I opened the secure copy of the final digest. The figure in the upper corner had changed. Total variance, $12,187,450. $12,187,450. It looked almost modest on paper. By 3 p.m., my former co-worker Serena texted, "Serena, did you hear? Audit's here. 3 people from Marston walking around with clipboards. Robert looks like he swallowed a stapler." Me. "Stay calm. Don't volunteer anything." Serena. "You started this, didn't you?" Me. "No, the math did." Then nothing for 2 hours. Around 5, a new alert flickered in the Sentinel mirror. External audit. Internal SEC compliance. Potential fraudulent transfer pattern identified. Recommending immediate review under Rule 10b-5, false representation of financial position. That was the moment the air left my lungs. The Securities and Exchange Commission wasn't supposed to appear in internal audit correspondence unless something had already crossed the line from mistake to misconduct. They'd pulled the thread. Across town, Robert was probably pacing his office, sleeves rolled, trying to control the story. I could picture him rehearsing the lines. Clerical error, vendor misclassification, foreign tax optimization. He'd used those words before. And Melissa? She'd be polishing her public face, choosing a pastel blazer for the Values Town Hall scheduled the next morning, the one she had titled Integrity in Motion. I opened my email. A new message sat unread, subject line, Request for verification of control model ownership. Marston Partners, External Audit Division. they'd found my name in the code signature. Dear Ms. Ruiz, we are currently reviewing a control system labeled Sentinel 3.1, which appears to be the originating source of a financial anomaly report. Could you confirm authorship and control scope prior to your departure from Halvik's capital? I read the line twice, then replied, confirmed. Developed and maintained under my oversight as Senior Financial Analyst, Internal Controls. Design approved by CFO, November 2022. All automated outputs were executed within compliance authority. I hit send, then sat very still. That single sentence was enough to seal the chain of custody. No accusations, no editorial, just fact. And fact is what cracks the floorboards. By dusk, the storm finally broke. Thunder pressed against the windows, rain flattening the street. I watched people hurry home, umbrellas bending like weak excuses. Inside that glass tower, they would be holding emergency calls, lawyers whispering about exposure, Melissa pacing, demanding control of the optics. But there are moments when optics don't matter anymore, when the numbers have already turned into evidence. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Serena. Serena. They're canceling the town hall. Melissa looked white. Audit found a trust account in Robert's name tied to Cayman routing. She's saying it's a setup. Me. She's not wrong. The setup was hers. I closed the phone. The apartment felt smaller than usual, quiet except for the hum of the fridge. On the counter sat the last page of my notebook, the one where I'd written, "Same money river, different boats." I tore it out and slipped it into an envelope. On the front, I wrote one name, Marston Partners, Legal Review Unit. Not revenge, just record-keeping. At 11:59 p.m., Sentinel ran again, its final scheduled dispatch. This time, the report went not only to audit, but also, through policy escalation, to the Board Audit Committee. That was the silence I'd been waiting for, the quiet between discovery and consequence, the sound of an empire holding its breath before the crash. Thursday morning arrived like a held breath finally exhaled. The sky was the color of unfinished paperwork, heavy and gray. At 9:01 a.m., Halvik's Integrity in Motion town hall began. By 9:07, it was over. Someone in HR had forgotten to disable my access to the public shareholder stream, so I watched quietly from home, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Melissa appeared on screen first. Crisp white blazer, a pin shaped like a compass, the company's new metaphor for ethical direction. She smiled, polished and bright. At Halvik's, integrity isn't a policy, she began. It's who we are. And then, mid-sentence, her screen froze. The stream stuttered, then cut to a blue placeholder slide. Technical difficulties. Please stand by. I didn't move. I didn't need to. I knew what had just landed. Somewhere inside that building, Marston's lead auditor had connected the final dots. By 9:10, 3 simultaneous notifications had gone out. Board of Directors, urgent financial misstatement review. SEC liaison, request for immediate document preservation. CFO Robert Harlan, mandatory attendance, emergency compliance hearing, today, 11 a.m. Sentinel's last digest, the one they hadn't even known existed until it reached the board's inbox, contained everything: transfer logs, approval stamps, beneficiary linkages, routing redundancies, and the forensic map of $12 million quietly reclassified as consulting expense. $12 million had weight, not just in dollars but in intent. That number spoke louder than any town hall ever could. By mid-morning, texts began to trickle in from the old team. Serena. Audit froze vendor payments. Robert locked in the boardroom since 10. Melissa pacing outside like she's auditioning for a disaster film. Marcus. Rumor is the auditors trace transfers to an offshore family trust. CFO's initials match the beneficiary. Serena. She's saying someone hacked the system, using your model as proof. Me. They can try. Every hash is timestamped. Every export notarized. The system can't lie. It's math. No one replied after that. Silence again. The kind that comes before collapse. At 11:32, Halvix's internal network logs captured something rare. Mass access revocations issued simultaneously by the audit committee. Robert's credentials, frozen. Melissa's, suspended. Even the IT director's. It was the corporate equivalent of seizing keys during a storm. I imagined Robert standing in that glass conference room, tie loosened, sweating under the recessed lights while an external auditor calmly recited transaction IDs he thought no one would ever see. Can you confirm, Mr. Harlan, that these transfers were authorized by your office? Temporarily, yes, and that the signature on this memo is yours? That's not the point. It is exactly the point. Outside the room, Melissa would be refreshing her inbox every 30 seconds, waiting for some miracle email that said it was all a mistake. It wouldn't come. Instead, a new message was already queuing up from Marston Legal. A polite request for her to attend a secondary review, this time not as a director, but as a related party. By noon, the company's internal Slack channels went silent. Then came the press embargo. Halvix temporarily halts operations pending internal audit results. The stock dropped 8% in an hour. I closed my laptop, walked to the window and watched the rain smear the skyline into watercolor shapes. A small part of me wanted to feel vindicated. But mostly, I felt tired. 10 years of precision had finally spoken for itself, and the voice of numbers was never cruel, just final. I sat at the table where it all began, next to the fading printouts of Sentinel's earliest drafts. At the bottom of one, I'd once scribbled a note. Truth has a timestamp. I hadn't meant it poetically, but it fit now. At 2:43 p.m., a final message came through. Official letterhead, gold seal. Subject line, Notice of Cooperation Request, Office of the Inspector General, U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. They weren't accusing me of anything. They were asking for context, how the model worked, how it detected irregularities, who had authorized its build. I stared at the email for a long moment, then replied with a single line. Happy to assist. The data will speak for itself. Somewhere downtown, reporters were already gathering outside Halvix's doors, cameras aimed at the revolving glass. The CFO would emerge first, disheveled, defensive, his lawyer close behind. Melissa would follow, chin high, pretending control. Neither would realize that the worst blow hadn't come from scandal or headlines. It came from the quiet arithmetic beneath their ambition. The system they'd ignored, written by the woman they'd dismissed for optics. At sunset, I stepped outside. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like electricity, that metallic scent that lingers after lightning hits something important. The city lights flickered against the wet pavement, reflecting like numbers across a spreadsheet. I thought of Melissa's last words to me. This isn't personal, Elena. It's just business optics. She'd been right about one thing. It was never personal. It was procedural, and the procedure had just begun. By Friday morning, the Empire was gasping. The first headline hit at 7:42 a.m. Halvik's CFO under investigation for misappropriation of funds. Sources cite internal control breach. The words internal control breach made me laugh under my breath. It wasn't a breach. It was a confession, written in numbers. The stock had fallen another 14% by market open. Trading was halted twice before 10 o'clock. The company's statement, drafted hastily overnight, was a masterpiece of denial. We are cooperating fully with regulatory authorities and remain confident in the integrity of our leadership team. Integrity. They'd been selling that word for years. Now it was their most expensive liability. Serena texted again just after lunch. Serena, board just suspended Robert indefinitely. Audit traced $12 million in vendor transfers to his family trust. Melissa's claiming she didn't know. They're not buying it. Me. She signed off on the reimbursements. Every expense over $5,000 required dual authorization. Serena. She said she delegated approvals to you. Me. She didn't. The logs say who approved. The system remembers. She didn't reply after that. Maybe she realized the futility of arguing with code. By mid-afternoon, footage began circulating online. Grainy cell phone video of Robert being escorted out of the Halvik's tower by 2 compliance officers. His face looked pale, swollen with disbelief, as if the building itself had betrayed him. Melissa followed 20 minutes later. She kept her chin high, jaw tight, walking as though the cameras were her audience and not her autopsy. She had always been skilled at optics. Even now, she posed as the misunderstood reformer. But the truth was simpler. Robert had been stealing, and Melissa had been helping him hide it. Sentinel's logs made that clear. In her name, there were 6 approvals for consulting reimbursements, all paid to shell entities tied to their joint property fund. The transfers had Melissa's initials in the digital sign-off, her fingerprint on every ledger line. The board met that evening under the euphemism extraordinary session. By midnight, both Robert and Melissa were formally removed from their positions. Robert's resignation letter leaked before dawn. Due to ongoing personal health challenges and misunderstandings regarding procedural oversight, I am stepping away from my duties to focus on family. The irony was surgical. The family he referenced was the same one whose trust account bore the stolen funds. I wasn't gloating. Not really. There's no joy in watching predictable justice unfold, only relief that the math worked. That night, Marston Partners sent me an encrypted link for deposition preparation. The preliminary findings report had my name cited 11 times as the originating data source. It wasn't a threat. It was protection. They wanted my cooperation before the federal inquiry expanded. Your system effectively functioned as a continuous audit control. We'd like to understand your methodology. I read the line 3 times, feeling something between pride and exhaustion. They saw the model for what it was, not rebellion, but responsibility. Saturday, the tabloids turned it personal. The Daily Ledger ran the headline, "Corporate Power Couple Implodes. CFO's Wife May Face Charges in $12 million Scheme." The story quoted anonymous insiders, probably Serena, maybe the legal intern, describing Melissa's volatile reaction when confronted by auditors. Apparently, she'd tried to pin everything on Robert's creative accounting. He, in turn, blamed her misuse of discretionary accounts. Marriage as cross-examination. By Sunday, the truth had divided them neatly in the public eye. He was greedy, she was complicit. And neither understood that the real verdict had already been delivered by a spreadsheet that didn't know how to lie. That evening, I walked past the Halvik's building. The glass facade still bore the company's slogan in silver lettering, "Trust is our currency." But the lights inside were dim. Only a handful of silhouettes remained: lawyers, auditors, cleanup crews. The empire of trust was being itemized. I stopped across the street, watching rain smear the company's logo across the windows. A cab idled nearby, its reflection breaking the word trust into fractured shards. Somewhere on the 18th floor, a printer whirred, probably reproducing Sentinel's latest report for the SEC's case file. Each sheet another confession, printed in monochrome precision. By Monday, Melissa and Robert's accounts were frozen. The board appointed an interim CFO, and Halvick's public statement changed tone. "We have identified internal control failures and are cooperating with authorities to ensure accountability." I highlighted the word accountability. They finally learned to use it correctly. There was no victory, just silence. The good kind this time. The quiet that comes after chaos when the balance sheet resets to zero. I closed my notebook for the last time, labeling the cover with a single word: resolved. Then I slid it into a drawer and let the sound of paper meeting wood mark the end of the war. Because in the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. Numbers returning to where they belonged. And the realization that even the cleanest lies can't survive their own arithmetic. The subpoena arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who looked too young to understand what a sealed envelope can do to a life. United States Securities and Exchange Commission, Notice of Deposition. Elena Ruiz, Primary Originator, Internal Control Model Sentinel 3.1. No panic. No surprise. Just inevitability. I read it once, folded it neatly, and set it beside my coffee. The sky outside was sharp and clear for the first time in days, the kind of light that makes glass buildings look like they're telling the truth. At noon, I walked into Marston Partners' downtown office. Marble floors, neutral art, air that smelled like filtered power. A young associate escorted me to a glass conference room overlooking the city. 2 auditors, 1 SEC representative, and a court reporter were already waiting. They didn't ask me how I felt. They asked how I built it. I opened my notebook. Sentinel 3.1 was an adaptive control model, I explained. It mapped transaction behavior against historical norms. When behavior diverged, it didn't flag people. It flagged math. The SEC rep nodded. "So you're saying it was neutral?" "It was honest," I said. "That's rarer." For the next 3 hours, we walked through code snippets, workflows, evidence chains. They asked why I hadn't reported sooner. I told them I had, internally, twice, once to Robert, once to the Finance Council. Both ignored. The Marston lead, an older man with steel-gray hair, closed his file slowly. "Ms. Ruiz," he said, "your model may have prevented a catastrophic securities violation. You did the right thing." I didn't answer. Right and easy are rarely the same thing. By Wednesday, the arrests were official. Robert was charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of financial statements. Melissa faced conspiracy and obstruction after investigators uncovered her role in approving falsified vendor documents and deleting expense logs. She'd tried to wipe her tracks, but Sentinel's backups had captured every deletion request, each one time-stamped under her user ID. She had, unknowingly, signed her confession months before she signed my termination papers. The news broke mid-afternoon. Every channel ran the same footage. Melissa stepping out of her townhouse, face pale, hair pulled back in a desperate bun, a row of microphones pressed toward her. "Mrs. Harlan, did you know about the missing funds? Was your husband acting alone?" Her reply was quiet but audible. "This isn't fair. I was trying to protect the company." Protect it? By firing the one person who actually had. Halvix issued a final statement that night. Following the conclusion of the internal audit, the board acknowledges significant ethical failures among prior leadership. We are restructuring operations and strengthening compliance oversight. We thank those who acted with integrity in exposing misconduct. They didn't mention me by name. They didn't have to. That same evening, my inbox filled with messages from former colleagues. Some apologies, some admiration, a few cautious job offers. I answered none. Instead, I opened Sentinel's archive one last time. The interface looked different now. Still, calm, almost serene. Every anomaly resolved, every variance reconciled. The numbers were quiet again. That weekend, I took the train to the coast. It was cold, windy, the kind of weather that scrubs everything clean. I stood at the edge of the pier watching the tide pull at the wood beams below. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to think about what came next. Maybe consulting. Maybe building another Sentinel. Something stronger, ethical by design. Not to expose corruption, but to prevent it before it needed exposing. I thought about Melissa, probably sitting in a holding room somewhere under fluorescent lights, realizing the worst punishment wasn't the charges. It was understanding she'd been undone not by malice, but by math. Her last words to me in that glass office echoed faintly. "This isn't personal." She'd been right. It never was. It was procedural, mathematical, inevitable. Before leaving the pier, I opened my phone one final time and logged into Sentinel's admin console. Archive status, complete. Encryption key, self-terminate on exit. I typed the 12-character passcode, pressed enter, and watched the confirmation banner appear. All records secured. Model retired. The screen went dark. The sound of the waves filled the silence. As I walked back toward the station, I passed a newspaper stand. The headline read, "Halvix exposes internal fraud. CFO and executive director charged." Sources credit anonymous whistleblower with uncovering scheme. Anonymous was fine. The work had spoken. In finance, we're taught that every imbalance seeks correction. Every debit finds its credit. Every lie meets its audit. That was all this was. An equation solved. 3 months later, the building that once carried Halvix's name still stood downtown. Empty, silent, its glass facade reflecting the gray February sky like a mirror that refused to remember. They'd stripped the signage off the lobby wall, leaving faint adhesive scars where "trust is our currency" used to gleam in brushed steel. The echo of that irony never quite left me. I walked past the entrance every few weeks on my way to Marston's new satellite office, where I'd been consulting quietly under an ethics contract. My title was vague. Advisor, Data Integrity Systems. My role was simpler. Make sure what happened at Halvix never happened again. There was no plaque, no credit line, no public acknowledgement, just a whisper of reputation. The one who built the model. I preferred it that way. The first real snow arrived that morning. Light, soundless. It softened the street, even the past. I stopped at the corner cafe across from the tower and watched flakes cling to the glass where Melissa once posed for internal PR shoots. I wondered if she ever thought of those photos now, framed somewhere in a forgotten folder, her smile rehearsed, her hands folded over stolen numbers. Robert had pled guilty. He'd taken a deal in exchange for testimony and restitution, $12 million returned, though not the years he'd taken from the people who built that empire in good faith. Melissa's case was still pending. She'd maintained that she was misled. Perhaps she was. Greed misleads everyone eventually. The board, desperate for redemption, had announced a full rebrand under new leadership, a clean name, a new story. But you can't rebrand a conscience. You can only hope it forgets. Inside the cafe, my reflection flickered in the window against the tower across the street. For the first time in years, I didn't see an analyst or a whistleblower, just someone who finally understood that integrity isn't a virtue. It's a discipline, something you practice in silence when no one's watching, especially then. A Marston associate had called earlier that morning. The SEC had closed the inquiry. No further action required. The phrase felt small compared to the noise it had taken to reach it. I thought of Sentinel 3.1, my quiet companion through those long fluorescent nights. The code no longer existed, at least not in any usable form. I'd deleted it completely after testifying. But sometimes when I walked past the office servers humming behind glass, I swore I could still hear the rhythm of its checksums in the distance. Calm, certain, incorruptible. Maybe that's what legacy really is. A pattern that keeps running even when you're gone. Later that week, Marston's director asked me to speak at a closed ethics roundtable, half compliance officers, half data scientists. I nearly refused, but then I remembered how many times I'd been told to stay quiet, to be a team player, to not overfit the decimals. So I spoke. Not about scandal or revenge, but about vigilance, about the power of quiet systems built for truth, not applause. Numbers don't lie, I told them, but they can be silenced. Your job isn't to expose, it's to preserve, to keep the record breathing long enough to speak. When the session ended, no one clapped. They just nodded, the way people do when something lands heavier than they expected. That night I walked home through the quiet snow, the city reduced to geometry, white, gray, and reflection. Somewhere, far above the street, a single office light still glowed in the old Halvix tower. Maybe a janitor. Maybe someone new trying to make sense of inherited data. I paused on the corner, hands in my coat pockets, and let the cold steady me. There's a strange peace in knowing you were right, not morally, but mathematically. Equations don't care who solves them. They just need balance. Melissa had once accused me of caring too much about precision. She'd been right about that, too. Precision saved me. It saved the company. And in a way, it even saved her. Because truth, once measured, doesn't vanish. It waits. As the wind picked up, I took one last look at the dark glass tower, my former battlefield, and whispered, not out of bitterness, but out of habit. Balance achieved. Then I turned away. The snow muffled my footsteps, erasing the trail behind me. But I didn't mind. The ledger was clean, the accounts reconciled. And somewhere in the silent circuitry of the world, Sentinel was still running. Not as code, but as conscience.